Hey, what's up? My name is Ahmad. Welcome back to the channel. Now, today's video is going to be about the topic of abortion, and it's part of my larger series, which is Why Is It Political? Now, if you aren't in the mood to listen to a bunch of abortion history and facts, then I would suggest you watch my other videos, and I am also releasing a movie review about the movie Zombies this Saturday, so stay tuned for that. And other than that, let's get into the video.
The Supreme Court has officially overturned Roe v. Wade.
The Supreme Court has overturned Roe v. Wade.
The Supreme Court overturning Roe versus Wade.
We're following some major breaking news down in the United States. The U.S. Supreme Court
has overruled Roe v. Wade, the 1973 decision giving a nationwide constitutional right to independence. The decision is expected to lead to abortion bans.
If you didn't know, in a 6-3 ruling, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade on June 24th, 2022. And this has me thinking about why is abortion political? The simple act of terminating a pregnancy. Well, today, I'm going to try to explain the reason why. I'm going to be dividing this video into a few parts to understand how we got here. I'll be explaining the history of abortion in the U.S. and then explain how it is even politicized in a post-Roe v. Wade world. To understand how we got to Roe v. Wade in the first place, we need to know what abortion was viewed in the U.S. throughout its history. A lot of people believe that abortion is a relatively recent occurrence in the world, but it was not uncommon even before the U.S. was formed. Abortion was practiced amongst the indigenous people as well as the Europeans who went into the land. Natives using black root and cedar root to induce abortions, while on the legal side in the colonies, it depended on whether or not quickening had started. Quickening is the first detectable movement of a fetus. Fast forwarding to after the Revolutionary War, abortion was seen as socially unacceptable but legal in most states, with Connecticut becoming the first state to criminalize abortion in 1821. Yeah, there was a time where Connecticut was the first to do something. No hate to my Connecticut viewers. But it did not punish the woman. When New York joined them in criminalizing abortion, they banned it whether or not quickening had started. Still, it was until the mid-1860s with the help of Dr. Horatio Storer, who was seen as the father of gynecology and was one of the most significant anti-abortion activists at the time, and even somehow convinced the American Medical Association to join him on his campaign to ban abortion nationwide. Side note, the story of Dr. Horatio Storer is crazy in general. So if you want a video about that or how we view sex in America in general, I'd be down. As a result of these campaigns, almost every state in the Union had some type of ban on abortion by 1900. During this time, all forms of abortion were seen as a felony except if the mother's life was in danger or if the fetus didn't have a brain. Even after these bans were implemented, over 2 million abortions had been done. And these were not always done in the safest conditions. By the 1930s, a rising cause of maternal deaths were these unsafe abortions. Fast forwarding to the 60s, as attitudes were changing on many other topics such as race and women's rights, abortions more specifically came to the forefront, as several states such as Hawaii, Alaska, New York, and Washington legalized them in 1970. In January of 1973, abortion was legalized nationwide, as the Supreme Court had ruled in favor of Roe in the case of Roe v. Wade.
And that is the history of abortion.
I wish this video was that simple. For my sake especially, I really wish it was. But like a lot of issues in this country, it is always challenging and complex. Now, what this case is and isn't may be confusing to those who aren't fully educated on it, which can cause many issues. So this portion of the video is dedicated to explaining what the case did, and most importantly, what it did not do. We can't start discussing the case without the woman who started it all, Jane Roe. Jane Roe, whose real name was Norma McCorvey, was born on September 22nd, 1947, to Olin Jimmy Nelson and Mary Mildred Goodrow. In the documentary, aka Jane Roe, McCorvey describes her childhood as rough.
I came from a very rough childhood. We were poor. It wasn't a happy time at all. It was always survival.
Which shaped how she lived her life. Her relationship with her parents was even worse, as she described her mother as a word I wouldn't even say.
My mom, she was a bitch. She was just a two-faced bitch. She didn't want to have a second child. Me.
Mary did not want a second child, and she definitely let it show in the way that she raised Norma. Mary was a drunk. Because of the alcoholism of Mary, Jimmy left his family when Norma was 9. Norma faced a lot of abuse from her mother, verbally and physically. But with Jimmy out of the picture, Mary decided to move her and her family from Louisiana to Texas, over 5 hours away. In order for Norma to escape this abuse that was her daily life, she came up with a plan with her friend Rita to run away to Oklahoma City. But in order to get there, they had to rob a gas station. They made it to Oklahoma City, but could only find a place called the Black Hotel. They were found when a maid walked in on them kissing. The police was called, and Norma became a ward of the state and was sent to an all-girls school called Gainesville State School. Ah, yes. The perfect place to send a girl that likes girls.
I was like so young. I was sentenced at 10 years old, and I resented it a great deal. But once I got there and I saw that it wasn't a dungeon, it was okay. Gainesville was a trip. It's wall-to-wall women. My God, I never saw so many boobs in my life. Tons of girlfriends.
She was there until she was 15, and she seemed to like the place despite it being a punishment. She would grow to remember this place fondly. After being too old for the reform school, she was sent to live with a relative of her mother, who remained unnamed both in the documentary and the document that chronicled her life. It was revealed that he sexually abused her for a 3-week period. This event and many other events in her life that relate to abuse, many say, crafted her idea of what love is supposed to be.
A relative.
And she was sexually abused by that man.
It was extremely hard for me to tell my mom what he was doing to me.
It completely messed up her feelings about love and acceptance.
I felt like I was out in the cold.
There were many instances in her early life where she really was seriously exploited and harmed and abused. So I think she became used to that idea. That sort of became her identity in a way. And she never went and got really help to deal with the abuses. You know, those don't go away.
Her mother found out, decided not to press charges, but at least took her out the house. That's the bare minimum that lady could have did. Where things were different, as Mary found a new husband, his name was Raymond, she still cheated on him. After that, Norma started working as a waitress at Cybils, also famously known as Sonic. There she met her first husband, Woody McCorvey, who was 22 when she was 16. They married in 1963. After that, her mother gave her some advice.
Then my mom, she says, well, if you're going to sleep with him, might as well just go ahead and get married. I married Woody about a year later, when I was 16. He was 22.
Norma got pregnant for the first time at 18. She told him he hit her. They divorced in 1965. She gave birth to her daughter, Melissa, Missy. Afterwards, she would begin to drink and go to local gay bars and befriend people who helped her come to the terms to the fact that she was a lesbian. Great, right? Not in the 1960s.
I was a sucker for blondes, you know, and redheads. Oh, God. My mom told me, you going around with those queers has got to stop.
A lot of people thought that gay people were child molesters, that the gay people should not be in the company of children.
Her mother did not take the news well, so when McCorvey went to go take a trip with friends, Mary decided to take her to court in order to take Missy, where she called McCorvey a flamboyant drunk, a lesbian, and unable to take care of the child. But allegedly, Norma wanted Mary to have Missy. As I have found out from both the documentary and research, McCorvey is a horrible narrator when it comes to her life. And if you see many more inconsistencies throughout me explaining her life, that's why. She changes opinions and stories as much as you change a child's diaper in a day. Norma continued to drink heavily and frequented the Red Devil, a lesbian bar. There, she entered her first serious relationship with a woman. Soon after, she got into an affair with a male colleague, where she got pregnant with her second child, Jennifer, which she put up for adoption. After this pregnancy, she was pushed into a period of heavy drug use, during which she abused acid and other hallucinogens. In 1969, as mentioned earlier, abortion was illegal in most states, especially Texas, which was the same year she got pregnant with the now infamous Roe baby. By this point in time, after all the abuse, emotionally and physically, as well as now living on the street, being a drug addict and a drunk, this pregnancy brought Norma psychological pain. So she sought an abortion by telling doctors she was raped. Keep that in mind. She went to an underground abortion clinic, which was known for its unsafe conditions.
I went to the illegal underground abortion doctor in an old rundown part of Dallas. It was filth and cockroaches. I was scared. A lot of women didn't make it out. They would bleed to death. I got out while I could.
Norma went to an adoption attorney, Henry McCluskey, who told her about two lawyers who had just graduated from law school, Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey, who were looking for a plaintiff
to help them overturn the Texas abortion laws.
They needed a poor woman who could not afford to travel to one of the states where abortion was legal.
McCorvey was the best fit as she was young, poor, and somewhat importantly, white. So if you're wondering who Wade is, well, he was the Dallas district attorney who was the defendant protecting the Texas state law on abortion. Eventually, the case makes it to the Supreme Court, where Weddington and Texas Assistant Attorney General have a discussion about the right to make a choice about abortion.
Jane Roe, the pregnant woman, had gone to several Dallas physicians seeking an abortion, but had been refused care because of the Texas law. In the absence of legal, medically safe abortions, women often resort to the illegal abortions, which certainly carry risks of death, permanent sterility. And in fact, if the woman is unable to get either a legal abortion or an illegal abortion in our state, she can do a self-abortion, which is certainly by far the most dangerous. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Weddington. Mr. Floyd. Mr. Chief Justice, please report. It's an old joke, but when a man argues against two beautiful ladies like this, they're going to have the last word. What procedure would you suggest for any pregnant female in the state of Texas ever to get any judicial consideration of this constitutional claim? Your Honor, I do not believe it can be done. I think she makes her choice prior to the time she becomes pregnant. That is the time of the choice. But once a child is born, a woman no longer has a choice, and I think pregnancy may terminate that choice. Maybe she makes her choice when she decides to live in Texas.
We
do not ask this court to rule that abortion is good or desirable. We are here to advocate that the decision as to whether or not a particular woman will continue to carry or will terminate a pregnancy is a decision that should be made by that individual.
So before I discuss anything, let me explain what Roe v. Wade fought for. So first, I should mention, McCorvey was not raped. It had nothing to do with the case or the validity of whether someone could get an abortion or not, and was not a factor in the Supreme Court's decision.
Roe versus Wade had nothing to do with whether she was raped. There was absolutely no mention in the Roe versus Wade decision. But most people think that Roe versus Wade was decided because the woman was raped. So now she's lied. She wasn't raped, so Roe versus Wade is invalid. I think many people thought that.
It did recognize the decision whether or not to continue a pregnancy was up to the individual and not the government, state or federal. Using the 14th Amendment right to privacy, which was secured a few years earlier in Griswold v. Connecticut in 1965. Also, in a 7-2 ruling with Griswold, which allowed right to marital privacy and contraceptives, and letting married people use contraceptives. Yes, married people were not allowed to use birth control or anything similar to that 60 years ago. Crazy times. Also, fun fact, the Voting Rights Act was also passed this year in 1965. It looks like we were just gaining rights left and right in the 60s, specifically 65. I wonder why we're losing rights now. I should mention, it did not allow women to get an abortion after the fetus became viable, which is about 23 to 24 weeks or 6 months.
In a landmark ruling, the Supreme Court today legalized abortion. The majority said that the decision to end a pregnancy belongs to the woman and her doctor, not the government.
On January 22nd, 1973, in a 73 ruling, the Supreme Court struck down any laws restricting abortion in all 50 states. Roe had won, or had she?
My phone rang. It was Sarah, and she said, "We won." And I said, "No, Sarah, you won." She says, "Well, I thought that maybe you would be excited." And I said, "Why would I be excited? I had a baby. But I gave her away. It's for all the women to come after me."
As it turns out, Norma never got an abortion. She ended up giving birth to the Roe baby almost 3 years prior to the ruling, on June 2nd, 1970, which, fun fact, is a day right before my birthday, and ended up giving her up for adoption. The baby's name is Shelley Lynn Thornton, whose identity was not revealed until 2021 with the release of Joshua Prager's book, The Family Roe, An American Story, which was released over a year prior to the Dodd's decision. Shelley had discovered she was the Roe baby a couple days before her 19th birthday, which is a crazy birthday gift, as Norma McCorvey had revealed her identity publicly as Jane Roe in April of 1989, and later said she wished to meet the baby she had given up. But when asked why, she couldn't come up with an answer. But her attorney, Gloria Allred, said it was about choice, but in reality, it was about publicity, and she had hoped income. It had been almost 20 years since she gave birth to the Roe baby, but coincidentally, she only started searching for her after she revealed herself publicly as Jane Roe, and she was not even looking for her second child, Jennifer, that she had given up. She was only looking for Shelley, the one associated with Roe. I'm not trying to spend this entire video talking about the complicated, chaotic, and complex life of Norma McCorvey, aka Jane Roe, so I will spend the rest of this section kind of condensing some of her life post Roe v. Wade. After the ruling, McCorvey chose to stay anonymous for the next 16 years and went about her regular life. That is until April of 1989, when she went to a Roe Street open clinic and introduced herself to Charlotte Taft, an abortion counselor.
Norma came to one of our events, and I'm going to think maybe it was a clinic open house.
We were down at the Roe Street Women's Clinic, and we were doing a lot of picket signs. And Charlotte came back over to where I was sitting.
She just came and introduced herself and said,
"Oh, hello, my name's Jane Roe."
And we said, "Oh, well, welcome. Thank you for coming, Norma was charming. She had sort of a wry sense of humor. She was very pro-choice. She said, I want to help.
She decided to publicly become a part of the pro-abortion / pro-choice movement, and her house was shot up, with her claiming that it was the pro-life people, but it may have had something to do with a drug deal gone bad, as a woman who had recently accused Norma of shortchanging her in a marijuana sale.
They shut out my living room windows, blew away my storm door.
2022 was not the first time that Roe v. Wade was in jeopardy, as in 1989, the Supreme Court threatened the precedent, so in response, 300,000 protesters went to Washington, D.C.
Good evening. Not since the height of the Vietnam War have so many people marched in Washington as did today in the name of legalized abortion.
They came from all over because of their concern that the Supreme Court may reverse the right to a legal abortion.
I met Norma McCorvey at the huge pro-choice rally in Washington, D.C.
There, she met the aforementioned Gloria Allred, and she said McCorvey told her that she wanted to speak, but she wasn't given the opportunity, nor did they want her to, as she was not the perfect person to have speak, despite her seeing herself as an activist because of her background.
People, they never gave me an opportunity. You know, they just, well, no, she can't speak. What?
She was not the poster girl that would have been helpful to the pro-choice movement. However, an articulate, educated person could not have been the plaintiff in Roe versus Wade.
Not only that, but she had brought up not being raped, which may have not been a deciding factor then, but could have definitely been a deciding factor in 1989.
You were raped?
I thought, I'll just go ahead and tell the truth. Well, why not? No, I wasn't.
So the pro-choice movement leaders were most worried about securing the rights to an abortion. This left her feeling ignored, as she has felt in many other aspects in her life, which led to her doing an interview out of spite, which is so real because I would do the same thing.
She felt that she had been denied the opportunity to be recognized and be acknowledged.
Which really set me on fire. I'll do it now just to show you I can do it.
And I'd like to introduce Norma McCorvey, also known as Jane Roe, the plaintiff in the very famous Roe versus Wade Supreme Court decision.
It's been hard enough for me to come out as Jane Roe and to step into the limelight, so to speak.
This was a decision that worked out great for her, as her and Gloria were going around every year to advocate for abortion. She was speaking for herself, getting invited to fancy dinners, and getting tons of press. And when I say tons of press, I mean tons of press.
We did something like 54 or 56 interviews in a week.
Really became a fighting presence in the pro-choice movement. Ended up working at an abortion clinic in Dallas in 1995. This is where she met Flip Benham, who was protesting every weekend outside of her job.
Me here is an abortion mill where little baby boys and girls die, and outside of the abortion mill are Christian moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas living out their faith in the streets.
The pro-lifers were out on the sidewalk every weekend. They used to block the doors, holler at the women. Don't go in there and kill your baby. And I'd say, oh shit, shut up. I had a job to counsel women to make sure that they were making the right decisions for themselves.
She had become the poster child they say she could never be. And the pro-life side, specifically Operation Rescue, stepped in.
She was their prize. And there was talk that had to be dealt with.
Norma McCorvey has an unwelcome new neighbor, Operation Rescue, and its national director, Flip Benham.
We've come to live right next to this place and give mothers an informed choice.
Operation Rescue moved right next door to the abortion clinic where McCorvey worked. Was this intentional? Duh. This started petty little fights between Norma and Philip. And when I say petty, I mean petty.
She was just spitting and fuming and calling me every F word that she could, because the F word was one of her favorites, and I was that.
I told them they were damn liars, and that they better check with their God to make sure that they were still going to go to heaven.
She would call up and put crazy things like on a Recordo phone saying, hey, we're having barbecued babies today. Would you like some, Flip? Would you like to come over and have some barbecued babies with us today? And of course,
See what I mean? But one day, Flip decides to go sit next to her on a bench and have a conversation with her about his past, which was similar to hers, and had an idea on what she may have needed. And through him is where she met Jesus Christ, who she called her boyfriend in her documentary.
That's a picture of Jesus. He's my boyfriend.
She was baptized by Flip as well, and after this, she left the pro-choice movement to join the pro-life movement, joining the same organization that had moved right next door, Operation Rescue.
Jane Roe in Roe versus Wade, the case that legalized abortion, says she's joining one of the most controversial anti-abortion groups in America, Operation Rescue.
Norma McCorvey has joined a leading anti-abortion group and found religion.
Having Jane Roe change to the pro-life movement was a great win for them. And since we're discussing both sides, this is a great segue into my next section, the rise of pro-life and choice.
Pro-life and pro-choice have always existed in some shape or form in this country, but its more modern form took place in the decades following Roe. And the cultural and legal battles has affected us for the last 50 years. Before Roe, the pro-life movement was small, spread out, and more focused on individual states, and more focused on state laws, as abortion was controlled by each individual state. But after 1973, it blew up, becoming a more national debate. Starting in the mid-70s, activists promoted the Hyde Amendment, which successfully prohibited funding of abortions through Medicaid, which has to be renewed annually, which means it has been renewed annually since the 1970s. While the activists stayed focused on individual fetal rights, they began to develop new ways to convey that message to the public, that being very graphic pictures of aborted fetuses. That brings two interesting figures in the pro-life movement, in my opinion, John and Barbara Wilkie. They published the Handbook on Abortion in 1971, also called the Bible of the pro-life movement. Dr. John Wilkie, yes, he's a doctor, is a hilarious person, like a bad funny, not a good one. He founded the Right to Life of Greater Cincinnati, and in 1980, he became the president of the National Right to Life, which is the largest and oldest anti-abortion organization. He, along with his wife, helped popularize the concept that female rape victims have a psychological defense against getting pregnant. I'm gonna say this one more time. He, along with his wife, helped popularize the concept that female rape victims have a psychological defense against getting pregnant. He, along with his wife, he said in an interview in 2012 with the New York Times, and I quote,
"This is a traumatic thing. She's, shall we say, she's uptight. She is frightened, tight, and so on. And sperm, if deposited in her vagina, are less likely to be able to fertilize. The tubes are spastic."
Obviously, he was denounced. Specifically, I will mention, by the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and Michael Green, a professor at Harvard Medical School, who said,
"There are no words for this. It is just nuts."
The drawings became a large part of the message that helped people to understand a fetus legally and culturally as a baby. Some pro-life activists have actually argued that legal abortion was worse than the Jewish Holocaust. Look, I understand. Y'all are fighting to make abortion illegal. But comparing it to a tragedy where millions of Jewish people got rounded up and terminated, killed, is insane. It gets worse somehow. Others have argued that the Roe decision is similar to the 1857 Dred Scott decision, which ruled that black people, slave or free, were not U.S. citizens and were not protected by the Constitution. Both decisions, they argued, made some groups less human and degraded life. Yes. Because a black person living in the 1800s who was not a citizen and owned by another human is feeling the exact same amount of discrimination as a fetus in a pregnant woman. Exactly. Now to the 80s, where it gets fun for two main reasons. Reagan and the evangelical Christians joined the movement, bringing more life and eventually radicalizing the movement. One may wonder, weren't they always there? No! In the 1960s, evangelical scholars couldn't figure out whether or not abortion was sinful, but by the 1980s, it had changed. Why? I'll give you a second. Racism. If you guessed racism, you have to like and subscribe. Because everything in America comes back to racism, or in Ronald Reagan. But in this case, it's racism. The religious right movement started in the 1970s as a result of the IRS attempting to rescind the tax-exempt status of white-only segregation academies. But Paul Weyrich, one of the creators of the movement, knew that the defense of racial segregation would not work to energize evangelical workers. They tried to use religious freedom being at risk as a talking point, but it failed. So they moved on to abortion, which would have the support of white evangelicals way more than segregation. We gotta win. With that, we see the creation of various pro-life movements, such as Americans United for Life, the Pro-Life Action League in Chicago, and Operation Rescue, featuring our old pal Flip Benham. Pre-Roe, pro-choice didn't exist. I bet that might shock some people. The term came post-Roe as a result of the creation of the term pro-life, but for simplicity's sake, I will continue calling it pro-choice. So pro-choice came as a result of the many activist groups in the 60s, such as women and black rights movements. It also involved doctors, as the restrictive laws. This institutional foundation is unique compared to the pro-life movement, as they had more doctors backing them up, as well as Medicaid and family planning organizations such as Planned Parenthood serve as funders of this movement, which helped bring changes to the laws on abortion in America. The funniest thing about this is that a major part of how abortion became both illegal and legal in this country is because of medical professionals. They're not consistent. If we go back to our pal Horatio Storer and the American Medical Association in the 19th century, by the time we get to the 1930s, you will notice a shift as there were some doctors beginning to discuss abortion law reform. But by the 50s and 60s, they were actively fighting for these reforms. Organizations began lobbying in state governments such as the American Law Institute, which proposed a moral penal code on abortion, calling for abortion to be legal in cases where there, and I quote,
substantial risk that the continuance of the pregnancy would gravely impair the physical or mental health of the woman, or that the child resulting from the pregnancy would be born with grave physical or mental defect, or in cases of pregnancy resulting from rape or incest.
The first state to follow the ALI model was Colorado in April of 1967. The American Medical Association, as well as the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, were serving as silent supporters of the pro-choice movement, where they were only in favor of abortions that in a limited capacity. Until 1967, when the AMA endorsed the ALI model of reform, and in 1968, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists endorsed the ALI model under limited reform. So basically they're like, y'all can do it, but only if the daddy's the uncle. And this may be a shock to most people, but Planned Parenthood did not vote to endorse abortion reform until 1969 and gave little support to the movement until before the legalization of abortion, despite being the face of it now. There were also outside events that put more eyes on the movement. In 1962, the highly publicized case of Sherry Finkbein, a woman who had attempted to get an abortion in the U.S. after taking a drug called... I'm putting it on the screen, and if you can read it, you can read it. If you can't, you can't. I'll put a picture on here too. Basically, it's a drug that causes fetal deformities, and ended up having an abortion in Sweden, as well as an epidemic of rubella measles in the U.S., which is also a disease that can cause fetal deformities when contracted by pregnant women. Both of these events impacted how the public viewed reforms on abortion. An organization devoted to the single issue of abortion, the Association for the Study of Abortion, ASA, was founded in 1964 by Dr. Allen of Planned Parenthood as an education association consisting largely of doctors, lawyers, and other professionals. The organization initially advocated reform instead of repeal of the abortion laws, and pushed distributing materials that educated Americans on abortion and supporting research projects on abortion. The ASA was important to giving prestige to the abortion reform movement in the early years when it was badly needed. The organization played an essential role in helping legalize abortion. After the Supreme Court agreed to do the Roe v. Wade case, the ACA provided Sarah Weddington and Linda Coffey with legal counsel from abortion experts, such as Harriet Papel, who had worked on several major birth cases before Roe, such as Tisdale v. Allman, Poe v. Allman, and most importantly, Griswold v. Connecticut. And law professor Cyril Means. The ACA also funded research by Means that resulted in an article on the history of abortion that was ended up cited in the 1973 decision and widely regarded to have a big influence on the case. The outcome of Roe v. Wade divided Americans over the issue of abortion and the laws surrounding it. We also see a division both in culture and the legal aspect of it as the two sides battle it out. And these battles have proven to be deadly at times. There has been various threats made to abortion clinics and workers after Roe was decided in 1973. There was an epidemic of pro-life violence starting in the late 70s. Since the National Abortion Federation started tracking the incidents of violence in 1977, pro-life activists have committed 11 murders, 42 bombings, 200 acts of arson, 531 assaults directed both at patients and workers. And some of these people even claim to be Christians. Speaking of which, in the 1980s, as the pro-life movement took its minor form with the backing of the religious right, some people used Jesus' name for this BS, specifically in 1989, which was seen as the peak in violence in general, where 29 clinics were lit or bombed. Did I read that right or something? Like one lady named Kay Wiggins, who had helped bomb 3 clinics that year in Pensacola, Florida, said she did it as a gift to Jesus on his birthday. Yeah, I need a second. Yeah, no. What the heck is wrong with you people? Like, I'm being serious right now. I hate to say this, but actually I don't hate to say this. Jesus wouldn't like y'all. I don't know why you think he would. You're out here actively hurting and trying to kill people. Where in the Bible did Jesus preach that? I'm on my journey, reading my Bible more. Where in the Bible does Jesus say, go kill people that are getting abortions? Go blow up the clinic where people are trying to go get abortions at. To be fair, I don't think bombs existed back in Jesus' time, but still, I don't know. Y'all need to read y'all Bible more. I'm getting very sidetracked, but I hope that most normal people, feel the same way that I do. Because what is this? Like, what? It makes no sense. Another example of violence is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where 15 people forced their way into a clinic, locked themselves in exam rooms, chained themselves to the sink, and destroyed about $3,000 worth of equipment before being dragged out by the police. Next story. As well as Joseph Slider and his org, the Pro-Life League in Chicago, who stole over 4,000 fetal remains from a lab and even held a funeral and burial for the aborted fetuses. The more I learn, the more I question what is wrong with these people. Even if we fast forward to the 2010s and 20s, there has been several incidents of violence. But for the sake of time, I will discuss the case that stuck out the most to me, which was March of 2022, about 4 months before the Dobbs decision, where a former Marine named Chance Brandon firebombed a California Planned Parenthood and plotting other attacks on Jewish people and an LGBT pride event in order to start a race war. When he was arrested, he was an active member duty of the U.S. Marines. Don't worry, it gets worse. He was also a neo-Nazi. I mean, if you're trying to attack Jewish people, then yeah, there's a pretty good chance you're a Nazi. Who frequently spoke about cleansing the U.S. of particular ethnic groups. I wonder how he felt about black people. Luckily, the explosion damaged just the front entrance to the clinic in Costa Mesa, Orange County. No one was injured. In November of 2023, Brandon pleaded guilty to conspiracy, destruction of property, possession of an explosion, and intentionally damaging a reproductive health services facility. He was sentenced to 9 years, which doesn't seem like enough for the other crimes that he was trying to do, but he's in prison right now. That's all that matters, I guess. According to the National Abortion Federation, a group representing U.S. abortion providers, there was a sharp increase in violence against clinics in 2022. I guess the violence worked. I feel I should state this before moving on, that no matter what side you're on, violence does nothing to end the political debate over abortion. It doesn't even reduce the number of abortions. The only thing that will make the number drop, come closer, come closer, come a little closer. Sex ed. I know that makes too much sense, right? We as a country feel weird about sex. Why is that? Make a video about that. Anyway, the lack of funding is not the only reason, but also having more widespread and effective contraceptive use will reduce the need for abortions. But you know what can help? The law, right? The legal system in America loves fighting for the The Supreme Court issued many abortion rulings up to the overturning of Roe v. Wade in the 2022 Dobbs case, literally as soon as the gavel was hit. I will be speed running through some of the cases throughout the decades and their ramifications. In Planned Parenthood v. Danforth, where the judges blocked the law requiring spousal support for an abortion. At least somebody got sent. Mather v. Roe. How do we get back to Roe? Allowed states to exclude abortion services from Medicaid coverage. Oh, no, no, no. You're going to have to pay out of pocket for this, baby. Kaale v. Franklin struck down an unconstitutional, vague Pennsylvania law that required physicians to save the life of a fetus that might have been viable. In Harris v. McRae, the court upheld the Hyde Amendment. Why is the Hyde Amendment still here? Shouldn't... Because it's the fact that it has to be renewed every year. And it's been getting renewed every year for like the last 50 years. Okay, I see you, Congress. I see you. It's good. It's all good. It's all good, I swear. In Alvey Madison, the court upheld a law requiring a parent get notified when a minor is getting an abortion that lives with them. In the city of Akron v. Akron Center of Reproductive Health, the justice invalidated a wide range of limitations on abortion, such as waiting period, parental consent without judicial basis, and a ban on abortions outside of hospitals after the first trimester. Thornburg v. American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists struck down a law that required informed consent to include information about fetal development and alternatives to abortion. Because why would I want to hear that while I'm trying to get an abortion? I'm saying like I'm ever going to get an abortion. In Webster v. Reproductive Health Services, Justice Rehnquist upheld rules requiring doctors to test for validity after 20 weeks and blocking state funding and state employees from participation in abortion services. Rust v. Sullivan upheld a ban on certain federal funding being used for abortion referrals or counseling. Hill v. Colorado upheld a law limiting protest and leafletting close to abortion clinics. Stenberg v. Carhart struck down Nebraska's ban on dilation and extraction abortion procedure. For those of y'all who don't know, here's an expert to talk about it.
My name is Dr. Kathy Altman. I'm a board-certified obstetrician gynecologist with almost 33 years of experience, and I've completed over 500 abortions. Today I'm going to describe a second trimester surgical abortion called dilation and evacuation, or D&E. A D&E is generally performed between 14 and 22 weeks of pregnancy. Before a D&E abortion can be done, the cervix must be dilated slowly over 1 to 2 days with laminaria or a similar product. Laminaria is a type of seaweed that absorbs water and swells to several times its original diameter. When the woman undergoes the evacuation portion of the procedure, she lies on a table with her legs in stirrups. She may be given injections of local anesthetic in the cervix, IV conscious sedation, or general anesthesia. The abortionist uses a speculum to open the vagina and uses an instrument to stabilize the cervix. Metal dilators may be used to further open the cervix if needed.
In Gonzalez v. Carhart, a slight changed court upheld a federal ban on dilation and extraction procedure. Did I read that right? So, so this Carhart person really did not like dilation and extraction abortion. They really did not like this form of abortion. Before going to Dobbs, I will be discussing the 1992 case, Planned Parenthood of Southeastern Pennsylvania v. Casey. Why is that such a long name? In the late 1980s, the Pennsylvania legislature adopted new abortion restrictions, including parental consent requirements, spousal notification, a waiting period, and expanded informed consent process. So in response, Planned Parenthood of Southeastern Pennsylvania challenged the law, and many viewed it as Roe's last stand, whether they stood for it or not. Throughout the Reagan era, abortion opponents demanded the appointment of Supreme Court justices who would overturn Roe. And with the confirmations of Justices Anthony Kennedy, Sandra Day O'Connor, and David Souter, pro-life activists were confident they had the vote. You know, a lot of people were confident they had the vote, like this year. However, to the dismay of the activists, the court did not overturn Roe v. Wade, but did replace Roe's trimester by trimester doctrine with a weaker level of protection, which the court allowed some more state regulation on abortion, potentially making it more difficult for women to access abortion. The court did decide there was no justification for overturning Roe, especially since Americans had an expectation of control over their reproductive health, including having access to abortion. Huh. I wonder what changed. Now for the case that's the reason I even decided to make this video, Dobbs v. Jackson's Women's Health Organization. So the story actually begins in 2016 when Senate Republicans prevented Barack Obama from filling the vacancy left by Justice Antonin Scalia in the last year of his presidency. The vacancy, which allowed Donald Trump to put in Neil Gorsuch the following year. And this began the ideological shift towards the right, especially with abortion. Anyway, moving on to 2018, when the Mississippi legislature passed the Gestational Age Act, which banned abortions after 15 weeks of gestation, except in cases of narrowly defined medical emergency or severe fetal deformities. The law challenged both Roe and Casey. As a result, the sole provider in all of Mississippi, yes, there's only one abortion provider in all of Mississippi, Jackson, Mississippi. And keep in mind, by the time the case reached the court on May 17, 2021, the Supreme Court had shifted completely to the right, with the Trumps nominating two right-wing justices, Brett Kavanaugh in 2018 and Amy Coney Barrett in 2020. This created a 6-3 conservative majority and provided the opportunity to additionally limit and eventually overturn Roe and Casey. So it shouldn't be that much of a surprise when there was a leaked draft of the majority opinion, which stated they were planning to overturn Roe v. Wade, which was published by Politico, which isn't that different from the final ruling. I don't know if this is like a warning, but what I'm about to say is going to shock you. Like, just get ready. Just get ready. Justice Samuel Alito argued that the right to privacy is not specifically guaranteed anywhere in the Constitution. What? The right to privacy isn't guaranteed in the Constitution, according to a Supreme Court justice. That's an awesome thing to hear. Like, that's an amazing thing to hear. I hate to bring up Dred Scott again, but Roger B. Taney, in his majority opinion, stated that African Americans were not and could not be citizens. According to the Constitution, I would not be a citizen before 1865. This is obviously why we have amendments, because why would the Founding Fathers write, oh yeah, women should be able to have abortions? They didn't even have the right to vote. What? These are the people that are leading our government. These are people that have positions of power over us. These are people that can determine how we go by our lives. Also, in that case, make sure you vote in your local elections. The local elections are more important than the federal elections, but the presidential elections specifically, because who cares about a senator? Y'all don't care. That's why you need to vote for them, because they also impact our daily lives. Vote locally. Just vote. Obviously, you can't vote for a Supreme Court justice, but for everyone else that you can vote for, go vote for them. This is this isn't written anywhere in the script. This is me saying this out of my heart. Go vote. Obviously, election passed already. But for this year, midterms, whenever there's an election, go vote. People need to remember, this is the one time that you'll be heard. And I hate to say this, but specifically being a black person, people died for us to vote. I know that's like I know I'm not trying to scare nobody, but let's be for real. Why do you think they don't want people voting? Why? Because if we vote, that means that we have numbers. That means that we can actually fight for something. So if you out here and you just have the right to vote and you just not voting, you're dumb. Like, I don't want to call anybody dumb. But if you have the right to vote and people died for you to have the right to vote, go vote. I don't care if you're a YN. I don't care. Go vote. And honestly, now that I'm on the topic, why are we worried about ops in the neighborhoods when the government are our ops? I'm not saying you should kill anybody in the government. I should clarify. I'm not promoting the assassination of anybody, even if I don't agree with them. I should clarify. My lawyer said that. I am the lawyer that said that. Anyway, I'm not a lawyer yet. Anyway, I just know what you can and cannot say on the internet. So I'm not condoning murder. I'm talking about political organization. We worrying about, shooting people on the streets. You know what we need to worry about? Them books. I know I sound like a huge nerd when I say that, but I'm being serious. They want us dumb. They want us dumb. They don't want us to have anything. They want us to be dumb. They want us to be fat. They just don't want the good for us. And by they, I mean the government. Obviously, the government doesn't care about us. Look at what they're doing right now. Or look what, well, not even just with abortion. Look what's happening with the government right now. It's in total disarray. I'm at risk for not being able to go to college because he wants to freeze financial aid grants. Anyway, I'm kind of going off topic, but in general, vote. That's the message. Go vote. That's all I'm gonna say. Make sure you go vote. Back to regularly scheduled content. Abortion wouldn't have even been in the Constitution anyway. Why would it have a deep-rooted history? Women couldn't even vote until the 1920s. Black women couldn't even vote until the 1960s. Let's be so for real. So, there was obviously many questions after this than answers, as this was one of the first times that we lost a constitutional right in the 21st century, which opened the gate to a lot of other cases, possibly on purpose. Most importantly, it also puts at risk the Griswold v. Connecticut right to contraception, as well as other cases that rely on the 14th Amendment, like Brown v. Board of Education, which desegregated public schools, Loving v. Virginia, which legalized interracial marriage, which I have a feeling might be safe due to some personal choices. Obergefell v. Hodges legalized same-sex marriage. Eisenstadt v. Bard. For those of you that don't know, this established the right for unmarried people to have access to contraceptions. Yeah, for all you freakazoids, if you want to keep buying condoms, pay attention to the Supreme Court rulings in the coming years. Look at all the rights that are at risk now because of this ruling in the so-called land of the free. What, right? Was it ever free? Let's be for real. If you're wondering how Norma McCorvey, aka Jane Roe, thinks about the overturning of the case that has her namesake on it, we'll never know, because she passed away on February 18th, 2017, 5 years before the overturning of Roe v. Wade. But she felt that no one should have control over a woman's body, despite the switch. But it was highly shocking in the documentary, aka Jane Roe, when it was revealed that she switched to pro-life just for the money.
This is my deathbed confession.
Did they use you as a trophy?
Of course.
I was the big fish.
Do you think they would say that you used them?
Well, I think it was a mutual thing. You know, I took their money and they put me out in front of the cameras and told me what to say, and that's what I'd say.
Wow.
Wow. Give me an example of what you'd say.
We've gathered here today to pay homage to the children that are being aborted in this abortuary. We're doing this because abortion is wrong. And I, as the former Jane Roe of Roe versus Wade, do regret signing the affidavit for the pro-abortion camps. That was probably about it.
It was all an act.
Yeah. I did it well, too. I am a good actress. Of course, I'm not acting now.
That really hurts because Jake's, it's big stakes. It's just really big stakes.
What we did with Norma was highly unethical. The jig is up.
She real for that, to be honest. She real. This ruling has affected millions of people in many different aspects and has sparked both arguments and discussion alike. And from the research, I was surprised to see what I found. So in order to help clear it up for myself, I decided to schedule an interview with two people from the opposing sides. I'll be right back. I actually have the interview right now. I'm running late.
Disclaimer, This section of the video does not reflect the real opinions of me or anyone, but instead a dramatic parody of real opinions. In order to get a better understanding on why abortion is such a dividing topic in America, I decided to interview two people from opposing sides in order to get a better understanding. Thank you for coming to do this interview with me.
Of course.
No problem.
We need to hurry up because I need to get back to the death camp to make sure another life isn't taken.
All right, to get this interview started, can you state your name and age for the record?
I'm Reverend Keith Sanderson from the Greater Christ Church off I-10, right off I-10. And I'm 56 years young.
My name is Kiara and I'm 24.
So, what would you say is your stance on abortion?
I'm anti-death.
I am pro-choice. I even have a couple of pins called Make Abortion Safe Again, Hands Off My Body, and You're Only Pro-Birth. If you want, I have some in my bag.
I believe if you wanted that man and you wanted to have intercourse, and you let him finish inside you, you should have that baby. That was your choice.
I also volunteer at Planned Parenthood on the weekends.
My first question is abortion murder?
Is abortion murder? Yes. By definition, abortion is murder.
No.
Expand, please.
As soon as an egg is fertilized, that is a human being. So if you were to go and kill that fertilized egg, which is a human being, that is considered murder.
Do you remember being an embryo or a fetus?
Despite my great memory, no.
Exactly. An embryo doesn't have a brain. It's just a clump of cells and can't feel pain until 25 weeks in. Also, most abortions happen in the first trimester.
Think about it. Would it be okay to go and shoot a newborn child in the head?
Never.
Exactly, son. These women are out of control. Out of control just to cover up for them being whores.
But what about the pictures of fetuses that look like they could have survived on the outside?
Oh, while later abortions can happen, it's more uncommon. Also, those pictures were chosen purposely to deceive the public into thinking that most abortions happen that late. And this, of course, is to cause more people to jump to their side.
These liberals just love to show their support for every single minority ever. The blacks.
You do realize I'm black, right?
Not you. You're one of the good ones. The alphabet mafia.
I don't mean to rush you, but how long will this take? I have a protest about trans rights after this.
And the poors. But they're fighting for the government-sanctioned murder of children. Ugh, that just gets my blood boiling. To be honest, I got my fair share of burials of unborns to show them dignity. Unlike the mothers, my fault, the filthy mothers who decide to kill brutally their own blood.
All right, my next question is abortion a selfish choice?
No.
Yes.
I would actually argue it's selfish to force a person to have the child.
Look, if you didn't wrap it up and use it as a replacement to that, then you're selfish.
Just toying with the idea of motherhood to God just because you want to go out and have some fun. That's just not right. I would suggest using one of these.
What the Aren't you married? Why do you have
I'm not against these. My wife, she's 32. She's extremely fertile. And me, I'm not looking to have no more babies. As a matter of fact, here, let me give this to you. I got more.
Thanks.
No problem.
These people aren't pro-life, they're pro-birth. Just look at the way children are treated in this country. Lack of access to healthcare, nutrition, and education, among many things. If a pregnant person knows that they cannot properly take care of a child in their situation, why bring a child into it?
What if they aren't in a financial situation to do so?
There's always adoption.
Adoption? You're joking, right? The foster care system is full. I can and will argue that forcing a person to have a child is way more selfish than an abortion.
Look here. I'm basically saying that it's the easy way out for a mother and a father so they don't have to take responsibility for their actions.
By that logic, isn't putting your child up for adoption the same thing?
We're not killing kids. Not at all. Because you aren't actually killing innocent children. You're just giving them another opportunity. As a matter of fact, I've adopted a child of my own. We treat him like he's one of us.
I'm not saying adoption isn't a viable option, but to say that every person should do so is not reasonable, given the current capacity of our system.
My third question is, does rape justify an abortion?
No. Rape doesn't justify nothing. Why'd you get raped?
Absolutely.
Expand.
Let's be real here. If you were wearing unrevealing clothing instead of what these whores and hoodlums out here wearing, these low highs, if you weren't wearing all these nothings, then maybe one of these criminals out here, which I'm not saying they're in the right, because they're not. One of these criminals out here wouldn't be looking at you like some snack. If we couldn't see your snacks, your little package. Maybe try investing in a sweater. Some baggy pants. Let me give you an example. If I shoot you and put a bandage on it, does that change the fact that you've been shot?
Well, no.
No, it doesn't. Exactly. The rape still happened, whether the child was born or not.
Who out here genuinely believes that a person should be forced to carry a child after being violated?
I would be a hypocrite if I would say a woman could get an abortion for rape if she wasn't ready for it.
If you feel that you have to change your personal morals in order to fit a wider belief, is it really something that you fully support?
To be honest, I've never thought of it like that.
A friend of mine, in the past, she was raped. She grew up in an ultra-conservative town in Arkansas. This caused her, to become pregnant. Despite the fact that this is very traumatizing, she was a devout Baptist. She believed it was murder. However, me, along with a couple of other friends and her doctor, told her that she was allowed to not keep the baby.
Think about it like this. If one of your friends was a child of rape, does that mean that their life doesn't matter? Does that mean you can just go shoot them point blank range in the face because they were a child of rape?
Of course not.
Of course not. That's discrimination based off of someone's background that they can't control. How would you feel if someone judged you for being of a different background?
That happens enough. Look at me.
Yeah, you real different.
What's that supposed to mean?
This was 4 years ago, right before COVID. She was so happy looking back and thanked us, as she wasn't able to properly take care of the baby and give them the love they would have deserved when she wasn't fully healed. At the end of the day, that baby will always have a piece of the crime with her and serve as a constant reminder of whether or not she was loved.
Deciding to abort the unborn child is just another act of violence to cover up the mother's own trauma. She just ends up worse. It's like she's an empty shell after.
My last question is, should abortion rights be restricted?
No.
Yes. As a matter of fact, I'm glad Roe v. Wade got overturned.
Why?
That bitch is the reason millions of kids got killed.
There are several reasons why a person would make the hard choice of getting an abortion. And being pro-choice, I know it's a hard choice. But that's what it should be, a choice. Not up to some old white men in DC who've never felt the touch of a woman since before Kennedy was president.
There's been studies that show that the age of a baby that can live outside the room, it's been dropping for a few decades. But yet, the laws have not been adjusted for that. A fetus, it can start feeling pain at up to 8 weeks. So much, in fact, that there have been doctors who actually refuse to give abortions just because they have done it so many times. And they're done with it. They're over. They can't stand to take another life.
Bottom line, women will continue to get abortions, legal or not. To me, it's more important that they're safe. That was the problem back in the day. Women were either dying from unsafe abortions or the baby affecting their health to the point of death. Roe was a lifeline to keeping women alive for almost 50 years. And now, we risk going back almost a century in women's healthcare.
We need to bring Jesus in their lives to stop them from being so promiscuous. It starts in the home.
There are Christians that are pro-choice.
Then they are actively going against the Lord's wishes.
Rev, where in the Bible is abortion mentioned?
Let's say that they do abort the child because they aren't ready. These women are destroying a human life just to live their sinful, disgusting lifestyle. And when they become too old and finally want to settle down, then what? Then they can't.
And you know who's affected by this the most? Poor white women and women of color who can't afford access to travel for an abortion. But you know who does? The upper class. They always find ways to get around the laws, especially when it comes to keeping the status quo.
I feel abortion is just a small part of what's destroying our way of life.
Our?
Yeah, son. You don't see it? They're trying to outnumber us. And soon we'll all be singing El Estandarte con la Lente Julian de Estrellas instead of the Star-Spangled Banner. That's why I fight so hard to save all these children from being aborted, just to put this country back on the right track.
And if they take away this basic right, what's stopping them from making birth control illegal? Plan B or any contraceptive? And that's why I protest to protect those who are our country's weakest.
Thank you so much for interviewing with me.
No problem, boy.
Of course.
So that interview only made me more confused. But what I can take away from that is that exposing yourself to both sides of an argument is a good way to view it, because you aren't subjecting yourself to only one worldview. But I think I know the answer to the question, why is abortion political? It has to do with the morals of people like Reverend Sanderson, who sometimes get elected into power, or lobbying to get people to care about it who make our laws, like Dr. Horatio Storer, in order to impose how they feel onto people who feel it should be a choice, or people who really don't have an opinion on it. My opinion on abortion isn't one that's exactly catered to both sides. While I'm more inclined to say I'm pro-choice, but that doesn't mean that I don't share beliefs with a Rev about people using abortion as a contraceptive. But that doesn't mean that a victim of rape or a 13-year-old girl should be forced to have a child. Point blank period. Like, I don't think any sane person is gonna literally try to tell me that that shouldn't happen.
It's ludicrous. They are sending women back to the back streets. Abortion will continue, whether it is legal or not. Women will die from this.
Abortion is not a simple topic or just an operation that can be banned, because if a woman does not want that kid, she's not gonna have it. They'll figure out a way to get rid of it, even killing themselves in the process. Or even if the woman wants the child, but in some cases, things can go wrong, like in Texas, which has the strictest abortion ban post the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and only allows for abortion if the mother's life is in danger. One woman named Amanda Zarowski's life was in danger, but she was still denied an abortion because it is a crime to perform an abortion if there's a fetal heartbeat, despite the fact that she had been diagnosed with cervical insufficiency, which is a weakening of the cervical tissue, which causes premature dilation, and that her unborn daughter would not survive. She and her husband wanted to have this baby, but out of the fear of repercussions of the law, which is a $100,000 fine and up to life in prison. Oh, but for the rapist or a murderer, they don't get that much. But for someone that wants to protect their health, they could potentially go to prison for the rest of their life. Yeah, that makes a bunch of sense. That makes a lot of sense, actually. If she would have just got a safe and standard abortion, she wouldn't have gone into septic shock a few days later. They had to induce labor and she miscarried her baby, who she had named Willow. She was sent to the ICU for the next couple of days. The sepsis has caused scarring on her uterus and fallopian tubes, which led to one tube being permanently blocked. This could have been prevented. You want to know why? If she had a simple and medically safe abortion. It is now harder for her to conceive naturally. Cases like this might become the norm as abortion is becoming criminalized again, like it did in the early 1900s. We're going back a century on women's health care. The fact that we could be returning to the past when it comes to laws like this doesn't rule out the possibility of other liberties, such as segregation. And we've even seen it recently with affirmative action, which is a whole nother discussion. If you think they care about our rights, they don't. They'll take that like that. Keep that in mind. Despite our own opinions, even viewers who I might disagree with, doesn't mean that we shouldn't treat each other with respect. That is why I decided to bring back this series, to understand both sides of the political arguments that we may see in our daily lives. While these topics are serious, we should not allow them to divide us, because we should be more worried about bettering our country. The way we choose our lives should be our choices, not the government. Think about if the government decided to ban getting an abortion because some churches are against all forms of birth control. Also, I have a better example. A Mississippi senator recently introduced the banning I don't even want to say it. I'm going to just let somebody else explain it.
A proposed law in Mississippi would make it illegal for men to masturbate. The law is called the Contraception Begins at Erection Act, and it would make it unlawful for a person to discharge genetic material without the intent to fertilize an embryo. Offenders would be fined up to $10,000. The bill was referred to the Judiciary Committee on Monday. If this sounds like a prank, it basically is, but one intended to make a point. The bill was filed by Democratic State Senator Bradford Blackmun. He told Newsweek that the bill's purpose is to point out the double standards in legislation. saying, "The reactions from some quarters relating to my bill indicate that men are not held to the same standard when it comes to the intrusion into their personal private affairs as women have been held to with the reversal of Roe v. Wade."
Yeah, that's... Anyway, moving on. Given the fact that Roe v. Wade was overturned, which uses the precedent set by Griswold v. Connecticut, the right to privacy, what's stopping them from overturning that? And soon, you won't even be able to use contraceptives with your own partner that you're married to. Exactly. Let that sink in. Thank you. Thank you so much if you made it to the end of this video. I sincerely thank you. Especially if you come from a Modern Family video, like this must really be a shock to you then. Anyway, I should say I really enjoyed making this video and I do plan to make more like this. So if you have any suggestions on any random topics or questions about why it's political, then drop it down below and tell me your thoughts on the video. Like, if I might have missed anything, just let me know. And if you enjoyed it, like and subscribe. And a day without learning